You're not broken, and you're not regressing. If you feel between versions of yourself, it's not because something failed to solidify. It's because the old structure has already released, and the new one hasn't asked to be defined yet. There's a subtle moment where you notice this. Not dramatically, not all at once. It shows up when you're moving through a familiar day and realize you're no longer leaning on the same internal shape you used to. The thoughts still come, the actions still happen, but the center they once revolved around feels quieter. Not gone. Just no longer directing traffic. What's left doesn't feel chaotic. It feels thin, open, almost suspended. You're still functioning, still responding, still present. But the inner voice that used to narrate who you are and where you're going has softened. That absence might catch your attention, not because it hurts, but because it doesn't. There's no panic rising to replace it. No urgency rushing in to fix the gap. That's what makes this moment unfamiliar. You were taught that loss of definition should feel dangerous. But this doesn't. It feels held, even without effort. And that detail matters more than it seems. Earlier phases of your life were reinforced by tension. You knew who you were because something was pulling you forward or pushing you away. Desire, resistance, ambition, pressure. Those forces gave shape to identity. They kept everything oriented. Now, those forces have loosened. Not collapsed. Not failed. They've simply stopped gripping. And without them, the structure they supported no longer needs to stay intact. This can feel like being nowhere for a moment. Like standing in a space without signs or edges. But notice how your system responds. There's no scramble to rebuild. No instinct to rush into another version of yourself just to restore familiarity. The pause holds without strain. You might catch the mind trying to name what's happening, searching for language that makes it feel manageable. But the words don't quite land. They dissolve as soon as you reach for them. Not because they're wrong. Because they're early. Nothing here is asking to be resolved yet. The quiet isn't a problem waiting for explanation. It's a signal that orientation through identity has temporarily gone offline. And somehow, everything continues to work anyway. What often unsettles you in this phase isn't what's happening, but what isn't. There's no clear storyline to step into. No sense of momentum announcing what comes next. The old version didn't shatter. It just lost relevance. And the new one hasn't formed because nothing is calling it forward. That lack of contrast can feel disorienting. You were used to change arriving with friction, with a sense of before and after. This feels different. The shift is quiet. Almost administrative. Something ended without an event, and now the space it left behind isn't demanding to be filled. You might notice how attempts to force clarity feel strangely flat. Decisions don't stick the way they used to. Labels sound reasonable for a moment, then fade. The system isn't rejecting them. It's ignoring them. That indifference is new. It suggests that identity is no longer required to keep things moving. Choices still happen. Actions still unfold. But they don't crystallize into a definition of who you are. They remain local, temporary, unclaimed. And the absence of urgency keeps confirming something deeper is already in motion. You begin to notice this most clearly in ordinary interactions. Someone asks about your plans, your focus, what you're working toward now. The question lands, but it doesn't hook into anything the way it used to. Before, you would have answered from a storyline already in progress. Now, the response feels optional, practical, neutral. You can answer briefly, vaguely, or not at all without feeling exposed. That neutrality isn't detachment. It's release. Identity used to stabilize conversation. It organized how you showed up, how you explained yourself, how you related. Without it doing that work, something else takes over. You respond directly to what's in front of you, without looping it back into a larger narrative. Moments stop needing to add up. They don't have to mean anything beyond themselves. And because of that, the constant background effort of stitching experience into continuity quietly fades. At first, this can feel like something is missing. But nothing essential has gone. What's disappeared is the compulsion to interpret every moment through who you are becoming. And that absence creates a kind of stillness that doesn't ask to be filled. Effort changes shape here. It no longer consolidates into identity. You still apply yourself when something calls for it, but effort doesn't echo back into self-definition. You don't feel reinforced by striving or diminished by rest. Earlier, effort was proof of existence. It told you who you were. Now, it's just a response. Used when needed, released when it's done. There's no momentum to carry forward, no pressure to maintain a version of yourself through activity. Motivation feels quieter too. Not absent, just less personal. You're no longer driven by an image of who you should become. You respond to what's present without turning it into a referendum on progress. Time shifts as well. The future stops leaning on you. Waiting feels clean instead of tense. Uncertainty doesn't demand answers. The system treats this phase as valid, not as a gap that needs to close quickly. And because nothing is rushing you, the transition deepens on its own. Without supervision, without direction, without commentary. As this state settles, something subtle becomes clear. Not everyone around you can recognize what's happening. Many people rely on continuity to feel stable. When that engine pauses, even briefly, it can look like drift from the outside. You may notice concern, curiosity, or advice appearing where none was asked for. None of it needs to be corrected. Explanation doesn't stabilize this phase. In fact, trying to explain often pulls you back toward structures that are already dissolving. You're not withdrawing from connection. You're just no longer translating yourself to maintain coherence. Conversations can remain unfinished. Boundaries adjust without announcement. You stop performing certainty to make things comfortable. Inside, a different kind of stability takes hold. It's not based on knowing who you are, but on trusting that you don't need to know right now. The ground holds without definition. You're not between versions because you're behind. You're between versions because the previous one has fully ended, and the next one hasn't asked to exist. Eventually, even the idea of transition begins to loosen. The urge to interpret this phase, what it means, where it leads, how long it lasts, loses momentum. Not because you found answers, but because the questions stop organizing experience. You're no longer watching yourself change. You're functioning without the structures that once required change to be tracked. Response arises from context, not identity. You don't need to decide who you are in order to decide what to do. What replaces interpretation is a quiet reliability, an ordinariness that doesn't announce itself. Life continues without being threaded through a storyline of becoming. This doesn't feel like arrival. It doesn't feel like loss either. It feels like continuation without scaffolding. And in that continuation, something resolves without being named. You were never stuck between selves. You simply moved past the need to define yourself through them. The experience doesn't end here. It just keeps going, unmarked, intact, and quietly sufficient.